My name is Natalie Pierce. I'm 27 years old. And this is not just a story about family conflict. It's about betrayal, greed, and the revenge I never thought I was capable of. For most of my life, I was the quiet one, the daughter who kept peace at any cost. But when my parents and younger sister tried to take away the only thing that truly mattered to me, the home my grandmother left me, something inside me broke. And once it broke, there was no going back. When my grandmother passed away, the world felt colder. She wasn't just a grandparent to me, she was the only person in my family who ever made me feel seen, understood, and safe. While my parents pushed me to be more like my younger sister, while they reminded me daily that I was too serious or too stubborn, my grandmother always defended me. Her house, a modest but beautiful old home with creaking floors and the smell of lavender in the curtains, had been my refuge since childhood. When the will was read and it was revealed that she had left the house entirely to me, I cried, not because of the material value, but because it felt like one last way of telling me, you matter, you belong. But my parents and sister didn't see it that way. At first, they pretended to be happy for me. My mother smiled too tightly, my father avoided eye contact, and my sister Juliette muttered, "Well, that's nice for you." I should have known then what was coming. The conversations began subtly. "You should think about selling it," my father said one evening. "It's too much work for you to maintain. Besides, Juliette and Ethan are planning a family. They'll need a place." I felt my chest tighten. "That's not my responsibility," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Grandma wanted me to have it." My mother's smile sharpened. "Don't be selfish, Natalie. You already live there rent-free. This house could give your sister the start she deserves." It was like a knife in my stomach. All my life, I had been second to Juliette. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. If she failed an exam, the teacher was unfair. If I aced mine, it was just expected. And now, even in death, my grandmother's final gift was being twisted into another way to elevate my sister over me. When I refused again, the tone shifted from persuasion to threats. My father's voice grew cold. "If you can't share with your family, then maybe you're no longer part of this family." Those words shattered me. I wanted to scream, to ask why my love and loyalty had never been enough. Instead, I just walked out of the room, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. For the first time in my life, I realized my parents didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as an obstacle. I thought the worst had already happened, but I hadn't yet discovered how far they were willing to go. The days after that conversation were filled with silence. My parents barely looked at me when I visited. And when they did, there was always that cold distance in their eyes. My sister Juliette, on the other hand, didn't bother hiding her resentment. She made comments under her breath whenever she could. "Must be nice," she'd say, rolling her eyes as she scrolled through her phone. "Living in a house you didn't even have to work for." I wanted to scream that she had no idea what the house meant to me, that it wasn't about money. It was about love, about memories that couldn't be sold. But the more I tried to explain, the less anyone listened. One night, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. "She'll come around," my mother whispered. "She's always been too soft. She'll fold if we push hard enough." "And if she doesn't?" my father replied, his voice low and firm. "Then we'll handle it ourselves," she answered. Those words kept me awake for hours. Handle it ourselves. What did that even mean? The idea that my own parents were plotting against me, their firstborn, was something I couldn't fully process. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But soon, the pressure intensified. My parents stopped inviting me to family dinners. Calls went unanswered. Juliette posted pictures online about house hunting, captioned with things like, "Big plans coming soon." It was clear. They already considered the house hers. 2 weeks later, I returned home after running errands and noticed something strange. A car I didn't recognize was parked in the driveway. When I walked inside, two strangers, a man in a suit and a woman with a clipboard, were wandering through the living room, jotting down notes and pointing at the walls. "Excuse me, what are you doing in my house?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The man looked startled. "We're with a real estate agency. The property is listed for sale. Are you the tenant?" My stomach dropped. Listed for sale? Before I could answer, my parents walked in through the back door. My mother's face turned pale when she saw me standing there. and my father stiffened. "Sweetheart," he began, in that fake patient tone he used when I was a child. "We were just showing the house. We thought it was time you moved on." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You put my house on the market without telling me?" "It's not just your house," my mother snapped. "It's a family home, and you're not the only one who deserves something from it. Stop being dramatic." I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. This wasn't persuasion anymore. This was theft, betrayal, and it was being done by the very people who were supposed to protect me. I kicked the agents out and locked the doors, shaking with anger. But that night, as I sat in my grandmother's old rocking chair, I realized something chilling. If my parents had gone this far, they wouldn't stop. For the first time in my life, I understood that I couldn't trust them. Not with my home, not with my memories, not even with my heart. That was the moment the seed of revenge was planted. After that day, everything changed between me and my family. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the hallway carried the weight of betrayal. My grandmother's picture on the mantel became my only comfort, a silent reminder that at least one person had truly loved me. I thought maybe the shock of being caught would make my parents back off, but I was wrong. Instead, their tactics grew bolder. First came the guilt trips. My mother showed up one morning with Juliette, holding a box of baby clothes. "Just imagine these rooms filled with children's laughter," she said, walking through the hall as if the house already belonged to them. "This is where your sister should raise her family. Your grandmother would have wanted that." My chest burned. "Don't you dare speak for her," I snapped. "She left this house to me. Me, not Juliette." Juliette smirked. "You've always been selfish, Natalie. You cling to things instead of thinking about people. Maybe that's why no one wants to stick around." Her words sliced deep because she knew my weak spots. She always did. My relationships had failed, and she was cruel enough to weaponize that truth. When guilt didn't work, threats followed. My father cornered me one evening as I was locking the front door. "You think you're clever, but this isn't over," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're making a mistake standing against your own blood. Don't push us." Something inside me snapped. For years, I had been the quiet one, the obedient daughter, the peacemaker who swallowed every bitter pill. But now, I was done swallowing. I started digging. I went through every drawer, every cabinet, every box of my grandmother's old papers. I wanted to be absolutely certain the house was legally mine. When I found the will and the property deed, with my name printed clearly on both, relief washed over me. They couldn't legally sell what they didn't own, but then another thought struck me. If they had already shown the house to agents, what else were they planning behind my back? The answer came 2 weeks later. I returned home from work and found the front lock tampered with. Inside, papers were scattered across the dining table, forged signatures, half-completed forms, and a real estate contract. My parents had actually tried to fake my consent. I felt physically ill. These weren't just manipulations anymore. They were crimes. And in that moment, my fear curdled into something darker. Resolve. If my family wanted war, then war was exactly what they were going to get. But I wasn't going to fight them with screaming or broken doors. No, I was going to beat them at their own game, quietly, strategically, and in a way they would never see coming. That night, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Ethan?" I whispered when he answered. There was a pause, then a voice warm with recognition. "Natalie? God, it's been forever." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "I need your help, and I don't know who else to trust." I hadn't spoken to Ethan in years. We'd grown up 2 streets apart. He'd been the boy who rescued my cat from the maple tree, and the one who knew how I liked my tea without asking. Life took us in different directions, and after my grandmother died, he drifted out of my orbit. I thought of him because he was steady, because he'd never judged me, and because selfishly, I needed someone who knew me outside the Pierce drama. When he picked up, his voice sounded the same, calm and slightly amused, like the world was still the place we'd shared as kids. I didn't waste the small talk. "Ethan, I need a favor," I said, "a big one." There was a pause long enough to know he was listening. "Anything," he said finally. "Tell me." I told him everything. The house, the will, the way my parents had tried to list it without telling me. I spoke quickly. like unspooling a rope that had been knotted for months. I told him about the forged papers and the men in suits, about Juliette's smug posts and my father's cold threats. I expected shock or condolences. Instead, I heard silence, then a short, flat laugh, an easy, incredulous sound that steadied me. "That's awful," he said, "and illegal." "Yes," I said, "and I need you to be the most unexpected person they could imagine." He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask what he'd get out of it. He only asked one question. "Do you want it back?" "More than I can say," I whispered. The plan we sketched that night was deceptively simple and dangerously precise. Ethan would pose as an interested buyer, someone with cash, no questions asked. He'd go through the motions of a purchase, visits, offers, inspections. Meanwhile, I'd gather physical proof of my parents' deception, photographs of the forged signatures, timestamps from the listing, copies of the agent's emails. I'd arrange for a lawyer to be on standby in case the sale advanced too far. Most importantly, Ethan would make the purchase in a way that allowed him to transfer the title back to me immediately. An LLC under his name, a trust, something that would legally protect me and be legally airtight against any retroactive scheme my parents might try. Ethan listened and mapped it out like he could see the chessboard of it all. "We don't want to humiliate them for the sake of it," he said. "We want to protect what's yours, and we want them to know they don't get to take it by lying." "Do you think they'll come at you?" I asked. The thought felt childish and dangerous. "They might, but they won't expect me," he replied. "They'll expect a wealthy investor, or one of Juliette's friends. They won't expect someone who used to trade war comics with you in the schoolyard." There was such a fierce gentleness in that sentence that my throat tightened. I could feel my chest loosening, not from relief so much as from the terrible, strange comfort that someone had chosen a side. We moved quickly. I met with a lawyer I could trust, a small firm that specialized in family property disputes. I told them everything, laid out the forged documents, the screenshots, the timeline. They advised caution, get the title checked, place a temporary injunction if there was any sign the sale was moving forward, collect witness statements from the agents, and do not confront the parents without counsel present. It felt bureaucratic and clinical, and yet every form filled felt like a small, honest stitch in a plan to sew my life back together. Ethan started calling himself a buyer that next week. He made polite, disarming inquiries to the agent who'd shown up at the house before, asking questions that seemed mundane: age of the roof, where the water heater was, whether the attic had original floorboards. The agent, eager for a sale, told him more than anyone should. He talked about Juliette's plans, about the family's eagerness to move things along. They all spoke as if I was merely a name on a piece of paper that could be shuffled away. Every detail Ethan fed back to me, I cataloged. Every voicemail, every email, every handwritten note, I scanned and saved. I started a folder on my laptop I named morbidly Inheritance. It held the will scanned in high resolution, the deed with my name, the half-formed contracts that bore my parents' signatures. Signatures I knew were forged because I'd seen my grandmother sign that year, and the curves were different, sloppier, as if someone had tried to mimic a life. At night, I found myself sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, my grandmother's favorite mug in my hands, poring over details like a detective who had nothing left to lose. I recorded conversations, legally, in two-party consent where needed, so the lawyer could use them if necessary. The more I collected, the smaller my fear felt, replaced by a cold, meticulous determination. Evidence was a kind of armor. Paper and recordings could stand in for the tenderness my parents had abandoned. Juliette, for all her social media bravado, had inadvertently become my ally in gathering proof. She kept flaunting her plans online, photos of a model home she admired, a ring she tried on with a caption like "soon." Those posts tied dates to intentions. My parents' impatience and arrogance gave me more than I could have hoped for. They behaved exactly how people who thought they had the upper hand always behave: careless, loud, certain. And yet, while the plan progressed, a quiet part of me recoiled at the duplicity. This was revenge, yes, but it was also preservation. I told myself that I wasn't trying to hurt for the pleasure of it. I was trying to build a boundary. I was trying to keep a promise my grandmother had made to me with the stroke of a pen. The day Ethan signed the initial agreement felt both surreal and biting. He tuned up the part of the actor he'd played as a teenager. Unassuming, interested, just wealthy enough to be plausible. My parents greeted him with open arms, proud smiles plastered like props. They bragged to the agent about how quickly the sale would solve Juliette's problems. They invited Ethan in, showed him the sunroom where Juliette could put a nursery, the garden where a future child could play. They were magnanimous and greedy all at once, and their hypocrisy stung. I watched from the hallway as they toured the rooms, watched my mother patting Ethan's hand with a warmth that never warmed me. Juliette posed for a photo with the agent, nose tilted in a way that said she already counted the keys. But when Ethan handed over the deposit, when the paperwork was signed under the LLC, something odd and liberating occurred. He wasn't a stranger who wanted my house. He was a friend who'd bought it with the express purpose of giving it back. And when the agent asked if anything else needed to be done, Ethan said calmly, "We'll keep everything transparent. This property will be held until the title is cleared and transferred to the rightful heir." That last part, rightful heir, was a soft hammer blow. It promised the legal warmth of the truth I'd been trying to prove. My parents, for the first time, looked slightly unbalanced. They had money, influence, and a script they'd rehearsed for months. They did not have, it turned out, the law or the truth. I went to bed that night with the house quiet around me. The old floorboards sighed. The lavender in the curtains gave off the same faint aroma as always. And for the first time since my grandmother's funeral, I slept without dreaming of fire. The plan was in motion. The next steps would be delicate: lawyers, transfers, confrontations with people who claimed to love me. But for now, there was a small, fierce comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. Ethan had become my unexpected ally, and that fact felt like the beginning of something irreversible, for better or worse. The weeks that followed felt like living in two worlds at once. By day, I went about my routines: work, errands, the necessary masks of normal life. By night, I pieced together every fragment of evidence like a surgeon stitching wounds that refused to close. Each document, each screenshot, each recorded call wasn't just proof. It was a reminder that I wasn't imagining this betrayal. They had tried to erase me, and the paper trail was the shadow they couldn't scrub away. Ethan checked in almost daily. Sometimes it was practical. Updates from the agent, whispers of my parents' eagerness to finalize the deal, or another careless text Juliette had sent about her future nursery. Other times, it was softer, asking if I'd eaten, reminding me that I was stronger than I thought. His voice steadied me in ways I didn't want to admit. But the closer we came to securing the house, the more reckless my parents became. They pushed the agent to accelerate inspections, cut corners, even suggested creative paperwork to close faster. My lawyer flagged every inconsistency, quietly building a case so airtight it could suffocate any argument they might try. And then came the night my father called me. He didn't sound like a father. He sounded like a man cornered, his voice sharp with the edge of desperation. "You've been interfering," he said flatly. I stayed silent. The pause on the line was thick enough to choke on. "You don't know what you're playing with," he continued. "Juliette deserves this more than you ever will. You'll only ruin everything if you keep pushing." For a moment, the little girl in me wanted to ask why. Why wasn't I enough? Why was my sister always chosen, always shielded, always given what I was denied? But instead, I said the words that had been burning in my chest for months. "It's not yours to give, and it's not hers to take." He hung up without another word. The following day, the lawyer called with the kind of calm I'd been waiting for. "We have enough," she said. "Forgery, breach of will, coercion attempts, even evidence of potential fraud with the sale. If they push forward, we'll file an injunction. If they back down, we'll quietly transfer the deed to you through Ethan. Either way, you win." I should have felt relief. Instead, what I felt was something darker, something I hadn't wanted to name. It wasn't just about winning. It was about making them see. And when the confrontation finally came, it wasn't in a courtroom. It wasn't with lawyers or agents. It was at the house itself. My parents and Juliette had shown up unannounced, their car rolling into the driveway like they still owned the place. I was inside with Ethan and the lawyer, reviewing the final transfer papers. My mother stormed through the door without knocking, Juliette at her heels, her eyes sharp with fury. "What do you think you're doing?" my mother hissed. "Selling our family's legacy to a stranger? To him?" She gestured toward Ethan with a venom I'd never seen. I stood up slowly, the papers in my hand trembling, but not from fear, from something colder. "It's not being sold," I said. "It's being protected. From you." Juliette laughed, a brittle, cruel sound. "You think this will last? You've always been too weak to fight us." And that's when Ethan slid the signed deed across the table. My name gleamed in ink, official, undeniable. The lawyer placed her pen down with quiet finality. "It already has," she said. The silence that followed was heavy, electric, and full of a rage that no one could voice. For the first time, my family looked at me not as the expendable daughter, not as the shadow behind Juliette, but as someone who had beaten them at their own game. And in that silence, I realized something chilling. Revenge didn't feel like triumph. It felt like power. The silence after the deed was signed felt heavier than any screaming match ever could. My parents stood frozen, their faces drained of color, while Juliette's jaw tightened like she was holding back an explosion. For years they had towered over me, dictating my choices, making me feel like a shadow in my own life. But now, with one piece of paper, the balance shifted, and they hated it. My mother was the first to recover. She pressed her lips into a thin line, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You think this makes you strong? It makes you cruel, heartless. We are your family, Natalie. Family is supposed to sacrifice for each other." The irony nearly made me laugh. Sacrifice? For years my sacrifices had gone unnoticed. My silence, my compromises, my willingness to be the forgotten daughter, all of it had been consumed by their endless demands. And now, when I refused to give up the last piece of myself, suddenly I was the heartless one. Juliette stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this. You don't even want this house. You just don't want me to have it. Admit it." Her words hit harder than I expected. There was a sliver of truth buried in them. Part of me did want to keep it from her, not out of pettiness, but because she had never cherished anything that wasn't handed to her on a silver platter. She didn't deserve this house, not the walls that held my grandmother's warmth, not the memories etched into every corner, but instead of answering, I looked at her calmly. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I don't want you to have it, because you've never earned anything, and you never will." For a moment, the room went still. Ethan shifted slightly beside me, ready to step in if things escalated. The lawyer quietly gathered her papers, her expression unreadable, though I could see the flicker of sympathy in her eyes. Then my father's voice cut through the tension. "You're no daughter of mine." The words landed like a blade. I felt them slice something final inside me. But instead of bleeding, I felt lighter, detached. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. I hadn't really been their daughter in years. Not in the way that mattered. They stormed out soon after, their footsteps pounding down the hall like retreating soldiers who refused to admit defeat. The door slammed so hard the walls shook, but the house remained mine, solid, unbroken, defiant. When the sound faded, I collapsed into a chair, my hands trembling. Ethan placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he said softly, but it didn't feel over. Not yet. That night, as I walked through the house, I thought about everything I had lost and gained. The house was safe, but my family ties were severed beyond repair. I had wanted revenge, and I had won, but victory tasted strange, bitter, almost. Because revenge doesn't give you back what you lost. It only changes the balance. Still, when I stood by the window and looked out at the darkened street, I felt a flicker of peace. For the first time in years, I was no longer the daughter who bent and broke to keep others comfortable. I was the woman who drew the line. And though I knew my parents and Juliette weren't finished, that they'd try to twist the story, to paint me as ungrateful, to gather pity from relatives, I no longer cared. The house was mine. The choice was mine. My life was mine. And I would never let them take that from me again. I should have known it wouldn't end with the slammed door. My family didn't know how to walk away, not when there was still something left to twist. The first sign came a week later, when my cousin Lydia called me out of the blue. She didn't waste time on small talk. "Natalie, What's going on? Your mom said you kicked them out of Grandma's house and sold it to some stranger. Is that true? My stomach dropped. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the background, rehearsing the story she'd carefully spun, that I was greedy, that I betrayed family tradition, that I put money above blood. I explained everything, how they'd tried to forge my signature, how they wanted to strip the house away, how they disowned me when I refused. Lydia listened, but her silence told me all I needed to know. The poison had already spread. Within days, the phone calls multiplied. Aunts, uncles, even distant relatives I barely remembered were suddenly concerned. Their words were sugar-coated, but the judgment was clear. How could you do this to your parents? Don't you care about your sister? Family comes first. Family comes first. The phrase repeated like a curse. Where had that principle been when I needed protection? When I was pushed aside for Juliette, again and again? One evening, after the fourth call in a single day, I slammed my phone down and buried my face in my hands. Ethan sat across from me, his brow furrowed. "They're trying to isolate you," he said. "It's classic. If they can't win legally, they'll win socially. Make you the villain." I wanted to say I didn't care what people thought, but I did. These were the same relatives who had hugged me at holidays, who had told me they were proud of me when I graduated, who I thought saw me for who I was. Now, they looked at me through the lens of my parents' lies. The breaking point came at a family gathering I wasn't even invited to. A friend of mine, whose aunt had attended, sent me a video clip later that night. In it, my mother stood in the center of the room, dabbing fake tears from her eyes, while Juliette clutched her hand like the wounded victim. "She threw us out," my mother cried, "after everything we did for her. After all the love, all the years, she sold her own grandmother's house to a man she barely knows. For what? For spite?" The room murmured with sympathy, nods, and gasps. My father, solemn as a preacher, added, "We don't even recognize her anymore. She's not the daughter we raised." Watching that video broke something in me all over again. Not because of their words, I had expected lies, but because of the audience, the nodding heads, the way people believed them without question. I realized then that my revenge wasn't complete. Winning the house had been one battle, but as long as they controlled the narrative, they still had power over me. I didn't want to sink to their level. I didn't want to spend my life fighting smear campaigns, but I also couldn't let their lies define me. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to play this game in public, I would play it too, but on my terms. I drafted a letter, not to them, but to the entire extended family. In it, I laid out everything. The will, the forged documents, the threats, the moment my father told me I was no longer his daughter. I attached scans of the legal papers, evidence of their attempts to sell the house behind my back, and I ended it simply. You don't have to believe me, but I will no longer be silent. If family comes first, then perhaps you should ask yourselves what kind of family betrays their own. Ethan helped me send it to every relative whose email we could find. It felt terrifying, like exposing a wound to strangers. But at the same time, it felt freeing. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was taking control of the story. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The reactions were immediate and brutal. Some relatives didn't respond at all. Others called, furious, accusing me of defaming my parents, of stirring conflict that had never existed before. Every message, every voicemail, felt like a fresh stab. But then, amid the storm of anger, came voices of reason, or at least understanding. My cousin Lydia was the first. "Natalie, I didn't know. I knew your parents could be controlling, but this..." She trailed off, voice trembling. "Thank you for telling me the truth. I believe you." Then my Aunt Margaret, usually the family peacemaker, sent a long email detailing times she had noticed discrepancies in my parents' behavior. She had suspected coercion, forgery, and manipulation, but never had proof, until now. It was a strange relief to feel allies in what had been a battlefield. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. Not everyone had swallowed my parents' narrative without question, but the backlash didn't stop. Juliette, emboldened by the support of some of our extended family, began a campaign to vilify me. Social media posts, text messages, even mutual friends were weaponized. Every comment she made was a calculated attempt to paint me as greedy, ungrateful, and cold-hearted. I felt the old familiar sting of being underestimated. I could see the pattern, like all my life. She thrived on manipulation, appearances, and charm. And like always, people believed her first. Yet the more she tried to destroy me socially, the more determined I became. I couldn't change what people thought overnight, but I could control what was real, and reality, backed by evidence, was on my side. One afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer. "They're escalating," she warned. "Juliette's using her social media reach to spread misinformation. We need to consider restraining measures if this continues." I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to lash out, to match her vitriol with equal fire. But I reminded myself, the goal wasn't to burn bridges indiscriminately. The goal was to protect what belonged to me, and to expose the truth without becoming the villain. That night, Ethan and I went through the house, reviewing the digital trail we had accumulated. Emails, screenshots, legal correspondence, even video proof of the forged documents. Every detail was cataloged, time-stamped, cross-referenced. "This is enough," Ethan said quietly. "No one can refute this without looking like a liar." I nodded. The weight of months of fear, betrayal, and anger had shifted. I wasn't just defending my inheritance anymore. I was defending myself, my integrity, and the memory of the grandmother who had left me the home she cherished. Yet, while I felt prepared, I couldn't ignore the creeping fear in the back of my mind. Even with all this evidence, there was no guarantee the narrative wouldn't continue. Juliette and my parents could still manipulate perception, twist conversations, and isolate me from the family I had once believed in. But something had changed inside me. For the first time, I felt a quiet ferocity that wasn't fueled by fear, but by resolve. I realized that revenge, in its truest form, wasn't about causing pain. It was about reclaiming power that had been stolen. And in that moment, I understood. No matter what my parents and sister tried next, I wouldn't crumble. I wouldn't be ignored, erased, or silenced ever again. I glanced around the house. The floorboards creaked under my feet. The sunlight streaming through the curtains highlighted every detail my grandmother had loved. And I smiled, faint but real. This house wasn't just a building. It was a testament. A proof that betrayal could be confronted, and that standing firm could transform despair into control. And though the storm wasn't over, I was finally ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were tense, but I finally began to feel a sense of control I hadn't known in years. Each phone call, each message, each attempted manipulation from my parents and Juliette became something I could anticipate, counter, and neutralize. No longer the quiet, obedient daughter, I had become a strategist in my own right. Ethan and I met regularly, reviewing the evidence, discussing responses, and planning our next moves. We weren't seeking revenge for the sake of cruelty. We were safeguarding what was legally and morally mine, and every careful, deliberate action built my confidence. One evening, I received a text from Juliette that was dripping with fake sweetness. "Can we talk? I just want to understand why you're doing this. Maybe we can work it out?" I smiled faintly and showed it to Ethan. "Classic maneuver," he said. "She wants to bait you into an emotional reaction. Don't fall for it." So I didn't. Instead, I wrote a calm, measured response, copying my lawyer on the message. "I'm only protecting what is rightfully mine. I am open to discussion with legal oversight. Until then, please refrain from contacting me in a way that is manipulative or coercive." Within hours, Juliette escalated in public. Another cousin sent me screenshots of posts she'd made, subtle insinuations, slyly worded concern about my behavior, and hints that I was selfish and ungrateful. But now, armed with proof, I could respond calmly and strategically. I started posting small, factual updates on private channels with trusted family members. Nothing inflammatory, just documentation. The timeline of my grandmother's will, screenshots of emails with the agent, copies of contracts, and notarized papers. Slowly, those who had begun to doubt me started asking questions. Who had the real proof? Who could be trusted? For the first time in months, I felt momentum shift. My parents' social advantage, their ability to sway opinions with words alone, was losing power in the face of facts. Evidence didn't argue. It didn't require emotion. It simply existed, undeniable. And those who wanted to see truth began seeing it. One evening, I found myself walking through the house, running my fingers along the familiar wood banister, breathing in the scent of lavender that had lingered for decades. I thought about all the times my parents had undermined me, all the years I had been cast as the shadow daughter, the one whose presence was tolerated at best, and I realized how far I had come. I wasn't afraid anymore. Even Juliette's subtle manipulations no longer scared me. Instead of anxiety, I felt clarity. Every message she sent, every attempt to smear me socially, every whispered insinuation to distant relatives was now data, something I could log, respond to, and use to protect myself. And slowly, I started to see cracks in their armor, small things. A hesitant tone when my mother called, a moment of doubt when Juliette's friends questioned her version of events, even fleeting glimpses of guilt in my father's eyes. They hadn't expected me to fight back. They hadn't expected me to gather allies. I had become someone entirely new, someone who refused to be gaslit, silenced, or erased. That night, I sat by the fireplace, reviewing the evidence folder for the 100th time. Ethan leaned back in the chair opposite me, a quiet smile on his face. "You've changed," he said softly. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in months. "No," I replied. "I've just remembered who I am, and I won't let them take it from me again." The house felt warmer that night, more alive. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a fortress, a statement, and a symbol of the boundary I had drawn. And I knew one thing for certain. The next time my family tried to strike, I would be ready. The confrontation I had been bracing for finally arrived, but not in the way I expected. My parents and Juliette didn't come quietly. They came armed with witnesses, gossip, and the sense of entitlement that had always protected them. They arrived at the house one evening, storming through the front door with wide eyes and clipped breaths, as if they were stepping onto a battlefield where they expected victory by default. "You think you can hide behind these papers?" my father barked, slamming a fist onto the table. "You've humiliated us in front of the family." Juliette was right behind him, her face twisted with anger and disbelief. "This is insane. That house was supposed to be mine. You're just being cruel." I stood my ground, my hands resting lightly on the stack of evidence I had meticulously compiled over the past weeks. Every forged document, every email, every recorded conversation, carefully organized. Undeniable. Ethan stood beside me, calm, steady. A silent reassurance that I was no longer alone. "You came here expecting fear," I said slowly, deliberately. "You came here expecting to intimidate me. But I'm not afraid anymore. And these," I tapped the folder, "prove exactly what happened." I began to lay out the facts. I showed the notarized copies of the will, the forged signatures my parents had attempted to pass off as mine, and the emails from the agent confirming their secret sale attempt. I played the recordings where my mother and father discussed forcing the sale behind my back. Every piece of evidence landed with the weight of truth, and the smug confidence my parents had carried for so long began to crack. Juliette's face paled, and my mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father's hands twitched, like he was trying to grab back a victory that had slipped through his fingers. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of papers and the rapid intake of breath from those who had accompanied them. You can't do this," my mother finally said, her voice faltering. "It's not right. It's legal," I interrupted firmly. "It's fair, and it's mine. Every attempt you made to take it was a violation, and the law recognizes that. You underestimated me. You thought silence and obedience would protect you, but I am neither silent nor obedient anymore." Juliette's hands were shaking now, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. You're just trying to hurt us," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I'm just protecting myself, protecting what's mine, protecting the memories my grandmother entrusted to me." Ethan stepped forward, laying down the final piece of paper, the signed LLC transfer that legally ensured the house could not be taken from me. "Everything here is documented," he said calmly. "Everything is legal. No further action can be taken against Natalie without it being a crime." My parents exchanged glances, panic flickering in their eyes. Their usual arsenal of guilt, intimidation, and charm was useless here. For the first time in decades, they faced someone who could not be moved by threats, manipulation, or favoritism. The moment stretched, tense, and fragile, until finally, my father spoke, voice low and defeated. Then, "It seems we've lost." My mother didn't respond. Juliette's gaze fell to the floor, and for the first time, she wasn't looking for an advantage. She was looking for a way out. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. There was no joy in seeing them beaten in this way, only a calm certainty that justice, however long delayed, had been restored. And as they quietly left the house, their departure marked more than just the end of one battle. It marked the beginning of my reclamation, not only of property, but of autonomy, respect, and dignity. For the first time, I truly felt like myself again. After the confrontation, the storm didn't immediately end, but its shape had changed. My parents retreated into silence, nursing bruised egos and wounded pride. Juliette, stripped of her usual confidence, avoided the house entirely, and even family gatherings were punctuated by awkward glances and hushed whispers. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange sense of peace. The house was mine, legally and morally. But more importantly, I realized that the battle had been about more than property. It had been about reclaiming myself. I started small. I rearranged the living room, adding touches that felt like me. Photographs of my grandmother, the books I loved, even a small herb garden by the kitchen window. Each action was a statement. This space was no longer just a legacy to be fought over. It was a home, alive with my presence. Ethan continued to be my anchor. We spent evenings discussing everything that had happened, planning for potential fallout, and simply enjoying a sense of normalcy that had seemed impossible for years. His quiet confidence reminded me that not everyone wanted to control or manipulate. Some people genuinely had your back. Occasionally, I would receive messages from distant relatives who had been swayed by my parents' version of events. Their words were laced with judgment, pity, or anger, but now, armed with my documented proof and a renewed sense of self, I didn't feel cornered or defensive. I responded only when necessary, calmly providing facts and refusing to engage in emotional disputes. One evening, my mother called. I hesitated before answering, unsure if I wanted to hear her voice again, but something compelled me to pick up. "Natalie," she began, her tone softer than I expected. We were wrong." I felt a surge of emotion, but I remained steady. "Acknowledging it is the first step," I said. "I don't expect an apology to fix years of betrayal, but I hope it means you understand the consequences of your actions." She stayed silent for a moment. Then, finally, she said, We lost our way. That was all. No excuses, no explanations, just a quiet acknowledgement. It was enough. The weeks turned into months. My parents and sister gradually faded from my daily life, their presence no longer looming over me. The house, once a source of conflict, became a sanctuary. I hosted friends for dinner, celebrated holidays in ways that felt genuine, and allowed myself to finally breathe without fear of manipulation or coercion. In this space, I discovered more about myself than I had in years. I realized how much strength I had gained, not just in defending property, but in defending my identity and boundaries. I had learned to recognize control disguised as love, to stand firm in the face of intimidation, and to protect what mattered most without losing myself in anger. And then came the quiet victories. Calls from family members who had initially doubted me, now apologizing for listening to lies, or friends who marveled at how I had handled the ordeal with calm and precision. Each acknowledgement was a reminder that truth, persistence, and courage could withstand even the most calculated deception. By the time the first anniversary of my grandmother's passing arrived, the house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like home. The walls no longer echoed with betrayal. They resonated with life reclaimed, trust earned, and boundaries respected. I often sat by the window in the evenings, sipping tea, watching the sun set over the garden. The quiet moments were now mine, untouched by manipulation or fear, and I knew, with a clarity I had never possessed before, that I had not only survived betrayal, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and finally free. It was a quiet morning when I realized the weight of the past months had finally lifted. The house, once a battlefield, now breathed with life and memories that I chose to nurture. The walls echoed not with conflict, but with laughter, conversations, and the small, ordinary moments that made it feel like home again. Juliette hadn't contacted me in months. My parents, though still present in family networks, kept their distance. The power they once wielded over me, through guilt, manipulation, and fear, was gone. And for the first time, I could live without looking over my shoulder. I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar textures of my grandmother's furniture, inhaling the scent of the lavender that still lingered, and letting myself remember the woman who had left me this legacy. It wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about reclaiming my own life. Ethan joined me in the living room, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed me one, smiling softly. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he asked. I nodded, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. "It does. Peaceful. Mine. Finally. Mine." And yet, I knew the journey hadn't been about winning against them alone. It had been about standing up for myself, recognizing my own worth, and refusing to let anyone, parents, sister, or otherwise, define me. I had learned to see beyond manipulation, to trust my instincts, and to act decisively when my boundaries were threatened. I reflected on the journey, the fear, the anger, the countless moments I had doubted myself, each confrontation, each small victory, each carefully documented proof had built not just a legal defense, but a shield for my spirit. I had discovered that revenge, in its most effective form, wasn't about cruelty. It was about reclaiming what is rightfully yours and refusing to be silenced. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of flowers from the garden outside. I leaned against the sill, feeling the sun warm my face, and allowed myself a deep, unshakable breath. The chapters of betrayal were closed, but the story of my life, written by my own hands, was only beginning. I thought about the family I still had, the cousins and distant relatives who had seen the truth and chosen to support me. I thought about friends like Ethan, whose presence reminded me that loyalty and trust could exist without hidden motives. And I thought about myself, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. The past months had left scars, yes, but they had also left lessons and clarity. I no longer feared confrontation, lies, or the manipulations of others. I had learned that standing firm, documenting truth, and protecting what mattered most could change everything. As I walked slowly through the garden, sunlight glinting off the leaves and warming my face, I felt a deep sense of closure. Unlike anything I had ever known, the gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender and roses, the same flowers my grandmother had tended to with loving care, and for the first time, the world around me felt like it belonged to me. This house, my grandmother's legacy, and the life I was carefully building within it were finally safe from the grasping hands of those who had tried to take it. But it wasn't just the house. It was me that was safe. Safe from manipulation, from coercion, from the shadow of a family that had once dictated my every thought and action. I paused, letting the sunlight warm my skin, and reflected on everything I had endured. The endless arguments, the whispered lies, the moments I had felt small and powerless. And yet, despite the scars, I felt something stronger than any wound: clarity. I had fought not only for a house, but for my dignity, my sense of self, and the right to determine the course of my own life. Every fear I had faced, every pang of betrayal, had led me to this moment. And I finally understood that no battle, no deception, no act of revenge, no matter how calculated or desperate, could ever take away the life I had reclaimed. I had survived. I had fought. I had endured more than I thought possible. And I had won. Not because I had inflicted suffering, but because I had stood firm, faced the truth, and refused to let anyone define me. As I continued through the garden, the shadows of the past seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet strength that settled into my bones. I could breathe freely, deeply, without the weight of expectation, without the fear of manipulation, without the constant pressure to be someone I was not. I was no longer just the obedient daughter, the overlooked shadow, or the girl who had stayed silent to keep the peace. I was myself, fully, completely, and irrevocably. And in that moment, surrounded by sunlight, flowers, and the enduring warmth of a home I had fought to protect. I finally felt what it meant to be free, truly free.